Un viaje de luz y conexión. 5 años han pasado, y qué viaje tan increíble ha sido. Hoy celebramos no solo el tiempo, sino las experiencias, los aprendizajes y los lazos que nos unen. Despierta nació como un sueño, y hoy es una realidad vibrante, llena de almas que buscan crecer, compartir y transformar el mundo. Miramos atrás con gratitud y al futuro con una determinación inquebrantable. Seguimos adelante, expandiendo esta luz, creando juntos, despertando juntos. Acompáñanos en nuestras transmisiones en vivo, donde cada encuentro es una chispa de inspiración y unión. Visita despierta.online y sé parte de esta gran familia, porque cuando despertamos juntos, creamos un mundo mejor. Despierta no sería lo que es sin ti. Cada persona que ha caminado este sendero con nosotros ha dejado su huella, con su pasión, su talento, su energía. Hemos encendido una llama que ilumina, une y transforma. Aquí, no solo crecemos, sino que florecemos, nos elevamos, nos impulsamos mutuamente a alcanzar nuestros sueños. Gracias por tu confianza, por tu amor, por ser parte de esta gran historia. Juntos, hemos construido algo único. Y juntos, seguimos avanzando, porque esto es solo el principio. Sigamos despertando, sigamos soñando, sigamos creando. 5 años, y apenas comenzamos.
Hola, hola a todos y a todas. Muy buenas noches y gracias por acompañarnos el día de hoy. El día de hoy tenemos un programa increíble. Está con nosotros Stephen Gray y el día de hoy va a ser en inglés el programa, dado que su procedencia es de Canadá. Entonces, pues, quien no pueda entender el idioma, después van a salir evidentemente las traducciones dentro del mismo programa, puede ver la repetición y también puede hacer sus preguntas. Espero que la mayoría lo haga y bueno, pues let me introduce Stephen Gray. He's our guest tonight. He's been traveling for a long time in spiritual pathways, both in spiritual and sacred medicine. Welcome, Stephen. How are you?
Muchas gracias. Muy bien, gracias.
Could you please let us know who Stephen Gray is, please?
I'm working on that.
What have you found out so lately?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can go anywhere with that question, Miguel, but let me put it this way. They say that it's the recognition of one's woundedness that leads one to the spiritual path and to the healing work altogether. And I, for whatever reason, had the sensitivity or whatever to realize that when I was young, growing up as a teenager and coming into young adulthood, that I needed repair, you might say in English, arreglado. Excuse me. I felt like I needed healing. So I got involved with, at first it was, what do you call it? It's like therapy groups and things like that. But I was also always very interested in spirituality. And I'm of the age where there was an explosion of interest in Asian spirituality in particular, Buddhism, Hinduism, Zen Buddhism from Japan, that sort of thing. I was very interested in that as soon as I heard about it around the age of 18 or 19, and that explosion into the West of interest in spirituality dovetailed or paralleled a similar explosion of interest in psychedelics. And by the way, because we'll probably talk about it, that includes cannabis. So there was a lot of cannabis coming around. That was when it first came in. I didn't even encounter cannabis. It didn't even get to my suburban town until I was about 17. But then once I was in university, I started to encounter LSD was the big one in those days. And I was always very interested in that. Let's see. So I'll just say that at the time, there was a lot of interest in the psychedelics, but not everyone connected that to the spiritual work particularly. For a lot of people, it may have been just like an amazing experience or a sensational experience of some kind or another. I was interested in both, but then there was an idea going around at the time in my generation, which was, okay, for people who've had experiences with psychedelics, as I say, LSD was the main one, acid at that time. And the idea was that people would be thinking, okay, so you've had an amazing experience. You've seen God. You've felt like you're at one with the universe. You've had an experience of, incredible love or peace or whatever. But now what are you going to do? You can't keep going back there all the time with these strong psychedelics. You have to find a way to, now they use the term integrated. We didn't have that term there then, but the idea was, well, you need some kind of spiritual practice. So that's what got me into Tibetan Buddhism. And that was my main focus of my spiritual work for quite a long time, until I discovered the work of Terence McKenna in the late 1980s. And Terence McKenna reconnected those two streams for me, the psychedelics and the spiritual use of them, the healing spiritual use. And so that was 30 years ago almost, and that led to a lot of different kinds of exploration, including 10 years of active participation in the Native American church with their peyote prayer ceremonies, a fair number of ayahuasca ceremonies, both in South America in the shamanist style, and also here in Canada with the Brazilian syncretic church, Santo Daime, that also uses ayahuasca. And then I've experimented with other medicines on my own, particularly, or with a guide, such as the psilocybin mushrooms and MDMA and 5-MeO-DMT, for example. And then, well, I suppose you'll ask me about this at some point anyway, but about 25 years ago, it started to become really clear to me that cannabis had potential that was not well understood in general in our culture. Even though so many people were using it, very few people understood that cannabis has a very ancient history, particularly in the East, in Asia, of spiritual use. So I got very interested in educating about that, and that eventually led to this book, which I'm not the sole author. I'm the coordinator of the project, and I wrote about 20% of the content, but I also had 17 other contributors. So that's that one. And then 3 years ago, I guess it was, I did a similar thing with, more broadly on psychedelics, and that one's called How Psychedelics Can Help Save the World. And just one more little bio detail that I'll fill in for you, which is for the last 13 years, I retired last year. I was the sort of lead organizer of a wonderful conference here in Vancouver called the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference. And we brought many of the leaders in psychedelics to Vancouver. So I met a lot of great contacts that way. So there you go. And I've got a new book coming out, but it'll be another year from now. And it's basically a collection of stories from my life.
Wow, such a nice story. And it seems you have much to teach us about what you've learned, and how do you connect the spirituality with the plant. What was your first approach? As you said, not at 17, since at 17 that's when you first got in contact with it. Yes.
Yeah. Well, as I say, there was a connection for a lot of us between the power and what psychedelics are capable of doing and the spiritual journey. It was obvious. Well, let's start with cannabis for a moment, because cannabis isn't by a lot of people considered a psychedelic. I do consider it a psychedelic. The word psychedelic comes from the Greek, psyche and delic. So psyche is mind or soul, and delic means manifesting. So it's mind. What psychedelic means is mind or soul manifesting. So if you apply that term to psilocybin and peyote and LSD and others, you can also apply it to cannabis, because cannabis can be soul and mind manifesting, particularly when you use it with skill and intention. That's been my educative focus. Then the other psychedelics, we'll say, they're pretty obvious. I mean, cannabis, a lot of people just had a mild experience. The cannabis back in those days was much milder for the most part, by the way. It's certainly much stronger now. Although, one uh, uh, highly regarded writer on cannabis, Dr. Lester Grinspoon, pointed out that this issue of saying, "Oh, this is not your grandfather's weed, it's much stronger now and more dangerous." Well, he said, and it was true, even though we were smoking weaker cannabis, we smoked more. We smoked until we got as high as we wanted to. So we did get pretty high in those days, oftentimes. Anyway, you take a strong hit of LSD, and you're in a whole other ball game, right? So it was pretty obvious that. So what dawned to a whole, I don't want to go too far into this because it's sort of a socio-political issue, but it is relevant to what we're talking about here. What people of my generation, now kind of pejoratively called the baby boomers, however, at the time, the people who were interested in this stuff identified as being part of a counterculture, like counter to, in contrast to the mainstream culture, which many of us considered to be barren, restrictive, tied down, very limited, that culture. So this is why I didn't want to go too far into it, but my parents' generation came out of 2 wars and a very severe economic depression. So there was an impetus, a very compelling impetus by people in the West, in particular, in the wealthier countries, in particular, I suppose, Europe, North America, to buckle down and make a safe world for themselves and their offspring. So they worked hard. They were very materialistic oriented. They bought houses, they got jobs and all that, and they created a condition that my generation grew up into. If you were middle class, particularly, it was pretty comfortable in a lot of ways. But then we looked, especially when we started smoking the cannabis and taking the other psychedelics, what it did was it peeled away the layers from our vision, our eyes, and we saw that what our parents' generation had created was, later on, in our life, we maybe thought that was, thank you for creating a comfortable foundation for us. But at the time, it looked really empty, and not producing of a spiritual life, really, a real spiritual life. So the psychedelics really opened that up for people, they did. And for me, they did as well.
Define spiritual.
Good point.
How would you define a spiritual person?
That's a great question. I love that question. It's almost impossible. So, in answering that question for myself once, I actually looked up the Oxford Dictionary, and it's a kind of a circular reasoning. It says the word, spiritual means of the spirit, right? But then it just sort of like takes you down a rabbit hole, like, well, what is spirit and all that kind of thing, right? So first of all, I wouldn't say there's a division line between a so-called spiritual person and a not spiritual person. It's not necessarily that you are even consciously interested in the spiritual path, you might say, right? It's how you are in the world, how you behave it's basic values, right? To me, a spiritual person is someone, okay, a lot of people are not all of this for sure, but I'll say, let's say the ideal or the full realization of a spiritual person is someone who is not confused by the concepts that are overlaid onto culture and onto individuals, someone who can experience life directly, direct perception, unfiltered by bias, by concept, by belief systems. Belief systems all live in our head. Spiritual realization is a holistic experience that includes the body and not the thought concepts that we put together to live this life, right? So a truly spiritual person, a really realized spiritual person, And I'm not claiming that status. Actually, I've had glimpses of the ultimate states, I would say. But a true spiritual person is a person who dwells in peace, for starters. Peace of mind. It's the ultimate. It's, Jesus nailed that one. Whether you like Christian teachings or not, Jesus nailed that one by saying it's the peace that passes all understanding. It cannot be understood. It can only be experienced. Buddhist teachings talk about the awakened mind, or bodhicitta, as a condition of awakened mind and body together. In fact, citta, C-I-T-T-A, in Sanskrit, means both mind and body. Excuse me, a fully realized spiritual person would be somebody who dwells in peace most of the time, maybe get thrown off once in a while, and has an open heart. So the other term that my Buddhist teacher used for enlightenment, if you will, was he called it awakened heart, right? So the theory, and it's, there's theory and there's practice, but this particular theory is informed by thousands of years of practice, which is that underneath all the confusion that humans live with, all the ideas that we have, all the worries that we have, all the complications that we create in our minds, underneath all that, everyone is awake. Everyone has an awakened heart. And so that's the path aspect of it, right? So maybe that's more relevant than even calling someone a spiritual person. For example, somebody who never thought about religion or spirituality particularly, but just happens to be a really kind person. That's pretty spiritual from my point of view. And then if you mix that in with being at peace or relatively peaceful, that's even more spiritual.
So you would say that spirituality and inner insights go hand to hand, obviously?
Well, insights are essential, but ultimately it's not even so much, well, yes, so insights should arise from experience. Okay. So one of my favorite sources of wisdom is the 13th century mystic poet Rumi, R-U-M-I, that a lot of people know of these days. Rumi talked a lot about that the gateway to wisdom is without thought. He has little lines in his poems like, "Silence is the language of God. All else is poor translation." Or, "Don't let your thoughts cover the moon of your heart. Let go of thinking." Or, "Let silence take you to the core of life." In other words, this is something that Tibetan Buddhists, that was my background, Tibetan Buddhist teachings, understand at an incredible depth that is rather rare on this planet, actually. It's not about belief systems. It's not about being a Buddhist or anything like that. It's just that they had, a couple of thousand years up on that icy plateau without television or grocery stores. They didn't have a lot to do other than practice meditation. And when I say meditation, I mean emptiness meditation. That's the ultimate. That's the kind of full aspiration. There are many other kinds of meditation. There are concentration practices. There are mantra practices. There are visualization practices. But in the Tibetan Buddhism that I studied, silent, non-thought meditation was both the beginning and the end. After you even go through all these other visualizations, the final practice for very advanced practitioners was called Mahamudra, great symbol. And it basically, as I understand it, is just being present, realizing that your connection to the divine, if you want to use that language, is in the gap, in the place where there's not thinking. My Buddhist teacher had a line like, "Your head garland of non-thought." A garland is something you wear around your head, right? So it's a head garland of non-thought, right? And he has a kind of a poem, and one of my favorite lines in the poem was, "Happy, sad, good, bad, all thoughts vanish into emptiness like the imprint of a bird in the sky." In other words, when a bird flies by, once it's passed, there is no imprint, right? It's emptiness. So I'm just stressing that that the gateway to wisdom is in our ability to let go of all these confusing and restricting concepts and beliefs about what's real or not real, and true and not true, and safe and not safe, and possible and not possible to do. Like a lot of people would say, there's no such thing as beings that are not in material form. That's just simply that they don't know. They haven't had that experience, right? So there's a world beyond our minds. Let's put it that way.
So you spoke about mentality. I do think everything is mental. Everything, no?
Yeah.
Because your perception about things, it's just you.
Right.
It's not, okay. What was it that made you look for more answers? Like that you saw that you couldn't resolve in the outside what you had in the inside. What
Mhm.
was it? What was that?
In my personal life?
Yes.
Yeah, well, it's what I said earlier, Miguel. It's that when I was growing up, I was shy,
Mm.
and I realized that I had a lot of things that I needed to work out. But for whatever reason, some people have that stuff and they don't do anything about it. They just sort of buckle down. They get their university degree, they get their job, they get their wife, they get their 2.5 kids, and so on, right? I have always been called to lift the cover up, as it were, and see what's underneath there. And that's just, I don't know what that is. It's just who I was and still am, in a way. It's karma. I don't know if you believe in reincarnation. Do you? Reincarnation?
I don't know if I do believe in reincarnation in the same way the Buddhists does, like from different kinds of evolution until you get to be human, if that's the correct way.
Hmm.
But what I really do believe in is that your body decomposes, right? So
Yes.
in a way, when you detach from your body,
Yes.
then you get to be, maybe this is my thought, on a higher, much more vast
Hmm.
conscience
Right.
than just yours. Like you belong on an electromagnetic camp or field
Yeah.
that holds everything. I don't know at what depth, but
Sure. Yeah.
that's what I do believe. I don't know if you get to be back, and I have always been wondering if why not come with the same wisdom, no? Because
Hmm.
of the evolution. Also, it would be much more evolutive if we
Yeah.
would learn or remember the past lives. That would,
Yes.
no, I don't
Yeah.
know.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So first of all, you said something about evolving in stages until you get to human. That's not the way I'm talking
Mm-mm.
about reincarnation. Um, uh, um, Here's how I understand it. And I don't want to sound like a know-it-all, but I have made a study of this. Um,
Please.
and it's not just Buddhists that talk about this. There are lots of people, and lots of people have had lots of like really smart, sane people have had past life memories.
Yes.
So the way I understand reincarnation, if you will, is that we are all developing, we're all on the way home, you might say. We're all developing spiritual wisdom. And so when you die, and the Tibetans are really clear on this, what you die with is the level of realization that you have arrived at in that incarnation. And that's where you start off the next life. So it's not like you keep the same name, you don't remember anything. Most people don't remember anything about it. And that seems to be part of the built-in design. If we could all remember our past lives, it would be way too confusing. It would be way too much information, right? But some people, and for example, I'll mention a friend of mine. She's really smart. She has a PhD. She leads ayahuasca ceremonies. She's quite brilliant and very sensitive. She has had lots of past life memories. So she wanted to find out, who's writing about that? Is there any confirmation for this kind of experience? So she read everything she could find on past lives and things like that. And she finally found this one author named Michael Newton, Newton. Michael Newton. And he wrote 3 books, I think. The one I read was Life Between, or Journey of Souls, and the subtitle was Life Between Lives. So it's worth explaining this. It'll take a minute if you don't mind, but in terms of understanding this reincarnation issue, Michael Newton was a psychotherapist, and he claimed that he had developed a very, very deep technique of hypnosis that was deeper than anything else he had encountered. And he started using it with his private patients. And what was happening, and in the end of his career, he said this had probably happened a couple of thousand times the same way, which was that without any prompting from him, people would go into either a past life memory or more often into the soul world in between lives, in between incarnations. And he said everybody was reporting it the same way, essentially. He said he was astonished that people kept saying, oh, this is what I'm experiencing. This is what I'm seeing right now. I'm going out of my body and I'm into the soul world here. It's like when people have these experiences with the psychedelics too, and also the millions of people have had near-death experiences where things like that happen. But in this case, these people are taken through a tour of the soul world, you might say. And they all described it the same way, sometimes even, or like many, many times even, a same visual look. So the very short version of it is that they would be met by somebody who you might call a guardian or protector, a spirit, after you die, after you drop the body. And that person takes you to a place where you meet the council of elders. And those are spirit beings who know your life. They know everything about it. And they're there to ask you questions to see if you learned anything in this incarnation. They just want to know. It's not like an inquisition. They're not like trying to, they're not going to sentence you to jail. They just want to know, what did you learn from this incarnation? And so you'd go through that. And people were describing it like they'd say, okay, the Council of Elders is up there like the American Supreme Court, and my guardian is like 5 steps behind me, slightly to the left, So people go through that. None of this is based on human time scales. It's just whatever. I think it's timeless up there or wherever that is. And then after that, you go and join your soul group, which people reported was usually between 15 and 25 other souls who are sort of at the same level of realization as you are. And you've been traveling karmically, you might say, or reincarnationally with these people with these souls for maybe thousands of years, right? And so you talk over things that matter with them, and at a certain point, you know what you need to work on, you know what you need to do to resolve stuff that you didn't resolve in the last incarnation, and you come back into the body to keep working on it. That's my understanding. I have heard from so many people, for example, Christopher Beish, or Chris Beish. He's a friend and a colleague, and he's truly amazing. He has an incredible book that's been very popular called LSD and the Mind of the Universe. It's if you can bear with me, it's worth giving a little background on that. Chris was he's a retired university professor from the United States. He was a professor of religion and philosophy, and early in his career, he got interested in the work of Stanislav Grof, who was a pioneer with LSD, used it. Grof was the head psychiatrist in the Prague Psychiatric Hospital in Czechoslovakia, now Czech Republic. And LSD was legal in those days. It was like 1950s mostly. Groff oversaw like a couple of thousand of sessions of using LSD therapeutically with amazing results. Anyway, he had a protocol for solo journeying. This is not for everybody. You know, you have to be pretty strong in your spirit and to start with to be able to do this. High dose LSD. For Chris, it was 500 to 600 micrograms, which is quite high. In a very safe place, which for him was his home, with a guide, a sitter, actually, not a guide, a sitter, because they leave you alone. The sitter's there to make sure your needs are taken care of, or that if you get afraid, you don't suddenly decide to call, you know, call the hospital, take me away, you know. And then you have eye shades to keep out extraneous light, and you have headphones with a playlist of music that's designed specifically for that kind of journeying. And you do that. He did that on Saturdays, and then on Sunday, part of the Groff protocol was to very, very carefully transcribe everything that you experienced. So he would do that all day Sunday. He did 73 of those journeys over a 20-year period. And what he brought back, he calls them diamonds from heaven, were incredible. But one of the things that he brought back or learned was he was taken into numerous of his past lives. He was taken into them. He lived them. When you take that much LSD, it's not like you're watching a movie. It's like you're in the movie. You are a character in the movie, so to speak, right? So that's just one of many, many people that have had that kind of experience. So anyway, that was a really rambly way of talking about how I think for myself, and I don't really want to make this about myself, Miguel, but, you know, for what it's worth, you asked me the question. I believe that I have been around spiritual environments in past lives. I've been told this by psychics a few times as well over the years. And so it's just kind of a continuation, you know, come into this world. I got the kind of stable home that allowed me to do my thing. My parents weren't, you know, particularly enlightened or anything like that, but they did give me a solid, stable home and didn't stand in my way, and I was able to follow my own pathway in life. So it's just been, I'm okay. Let's try another what's the word? Not anecdote, template, or you might say, not template. I'm never mind. I haven't got the right word for it. The Buddha himself is reputed to have said that there were 49 levels of aspiration. So the highest level, let's say that was level 49, is people who are totally into devoting their whole lives with single-mindedness to becoming enlightened, right? That's level 49. And then all the way down the scale, or the levels, are people of, you know, like maybe level 48 as well, but I want to be married too, you know, I don't know. And then you go down, but then you get to the other end of it, down to say level 1 or 0, are people who have no interest in change. They're not interested in changing themselves. Okay. So I don't know where I would be on that level, but I mean, on that scale, but I would definitely somewhere farther up, in the sense that I haven't spent my life like living in a monastery or meditating 8 hours a day, but I'm convinced, and this is, you know, we're talking about psychedelics tonight as well, right? So I'm convinced from numerous experiences I've had with psychedelics, not to mention all the reading I've done of mystics and everybody, that there is such a state as the awakened heart or the awakened mind, right? So I'm driven by examining what stands in the way of that for me. There's another thing that Rumi said was, you don't have to seek for love. What you need to do is look at what in yourself is standing in the way of love, right? So that's my personal answer to your question about, you know, why I'm on this path, if you want to call it that.
You spoke about the divine and
Yeah.
Jesus Christ, okay?
Yeah.
I guess you grew up in a Catholic or Christian family?
Yeah, nominally Christian, Anglican, the English church.
Okay.
My
So
mom was
what's
into.
your
Oh,
thoughts
go ahead.
about who is God? What's God for you? What?
Oh boy. Well, it's not what, you know, sort of Sunday Christians think. It's not, you know, we don't know. God is unknowable. You know, if you think God is this sort of great being in the sky that's watching you, well, maybe that's the case. But all the people that believe that, they don't know that. That's just a belief system. That's what I was saying earlier, Miguel, is that the connection to God, if you will, if you want to use that language, the understanding, the oneness with God, or the oneness with divine, or the oneness with what actually is our own true nature, is not found by study or belief systems, period. It's found by unwinding all the sort of chains that bind us. And that's through things like meditation and psychedelics, basically, to be honest. And when I say meditation, again, I mean non-thought focused sort of meditation, that we can relax. It's one simple way. You know, you asked about what's a spiritual person. Is it on one level, a spiritual person is a person who knows how to relax and doesn't have to be caught up in their head all the time, you know? So it's one of my favorite words actually is trust. This kind of came to me in some of my, visions, you might say, several years ago. Trust with a capital T, confianza in Spanish, I guess. Is it exactly the same, confianza and trust?
Yes.
Anyway, yeah. So what it means is trusting our innate non-thought intelligence, trusting the movement of energy in the natural movement of energy. There's a natural, unforced movement of energy all the time going on. You know, you could call it the energy of love, you could call it the energy of creation, but we're 99.9% or more of humans have become disconnected from it. And so the potential that we have is to reconnect to that. And it comes from allowing ourselves to surrender and trust that. It's easy to say trust, but it's, I know from my own experience, it's really hard to trust the natural flow of things. We always want to try to control. We want to have things go a certain way, but the practice is letting go of all that.
Okay. So
Yeah.
who's God? My question still remains.
Oh, sorry, what was that? I think I lost your question there. What was that again?
God. What?
God?
Who?
Yeah.
What does it mean if you hear that word? I don't know.
Well, okay. So first of all, I don't think anyone knows exactly what God is, and there's numerous ways to look at this. First of all, like I say, belief and $3 will get you a cup of coffee. So it's not about believing in God, right? Or Jesus or anything. It's about experiencing it. And that's a long, long journey, at least a life, as I said before, maybe numerous lifetimes, to be able to slowly undo all the bindings, all the confusion, and get there. So the closest I could say to what God is as in my understanding, is it's not a being, although there are certainly beings. Many millions of deep explorers of consciousness have experienced the presence of spirit beings. Psychedelics are particularly good for that, but none of those people would say that's God. They would say that those are angels, archangels, spirit guides, or sometimes dark forces. They can be dark forces too. That's another whole issue with psychedelics, by the way. But nobody who's actually experienced the depths would say that they know what God is, I don't think. In fact, the Tibetans, the Buddhists, they don't even posit a God per se, although they certainly talk about lots of different spirit beings, but they don't say there's a God. Buddhism is what's called non-theistic, which doesn't mean it's not atheistic. It doesn't, like, atheistic is a belief that there is no God, right? Non-theism is a lack of attachment to thinking that there's anything outside of you that can save you if you believe in it. I hope that makes sense. Theism can be anything. Theism can be a belief that if you get the perfect job or make enough money, you'll be the happy person that you've always wanted to be. That's also theism. So theism is the illusion that anything other than your own spiritual journey can free you from the chains of confused existence, of the ego's limits, right? So for me, God is the, it's weird even to try to talk about it, to be honest, because words just don't cut it. But the best I can say is this: to me, God is that peace that passes all understanding. It's an eternal energy of love and creation and creativity. If you look around, if you really open your eyes, or even just study, like one of the things that's wonderful these days is the studies that scientists are doing with insects and animals and all kinds of different species. I have a book up on my bookshelves called Eight-Leg Wonders. That's about spiders. You wouldn't believe how intelligent these little things are, I could tell you stories, but it's unbelievable. Or that's what I say. I love the studies that scientists do about this stuff. They have studied slime mold. Slime mold have no brains. They're just like a couple of cells or whatever, right? And the scientists know what their food source is, like what they like to consume or eat, right? So they've created a maze, a labyrinth. I guess it's a maze in English is what you'd call it, a maze, where you have to, find your way through and you get into dead ends, all that. So they put the slime mold at one side of the maze, and they put its food source on the opposite side, and the slime mold had no problem finding its way through the maze in a way that a human wouldn't even, right? A human would hit a lot of dead ends and eventually find their way. The slime mold just whoop, through the maze, got the food source. So then they took it one step farther. They put the food source in two different places, but both on the far sides of the maze, right? The slime mold split itself in two, sent part of itself to one source, part of itself to the other source, got the food, and then joined again. Now, and it doesn't have a brain, right? It doesn't have a brain. Now, just that little bit of information on its own should tell you how little we actually know about the universe, about creation, about God, if you want to use that language, right? So the reason I'm saying all that is because there is mindedness. There's an incredible active intelligence going on all the time. You just look around at this world, you look at the incredible intelligence in any species and the interactivity among species, bees and plants, whatever. Mm-hmm. It's incredible. Sometimes I think about the human body. My God, what an invention, like all the different parts we have and how they all work together, all these different organs we have and molecules and blood and, endocannabinoid systems to process our smoking of cannabis. It's just an absolutely stunningly unbelievable cosmos that we live in. And to me, that's enough to know. You don't have to say you don't have to try to define God. Mm-hmm. What we need to know as humans is that there is eternal, endless, timeless creation, and that the universe is made of that mind. You can call it mind, you can call it whatever you want, you can call it the ultimate source, but that's, I think, all what humans in reality, rather than theoretically, but for our lives, just need to know that we are in an incredibly intelligent, beautiful cosmos, and our ultimate potential is to be able to realize that. And I don't mean realize it, again, conceptually, but realize it with the full embrace of our experience.
Thank you. As you said, you've gone through different cultures regarding spirituality, and you found out as well that there's some use of sacred plants in their culture.
Mm-hmm.
In your experience, could you please go further into that theme, like different cultures, different plants? In your experience, what was it besides cannabis as well?
Oh yeah, Well, I'm not an authority. I mean, some people actually make a study of this, that
Mm,
zoologists or, whatever, uh, anthropologists, cultural anthropologists, and so on. But I'm pretty sure that every culture on this planet has had mind-altering plants. It's just part of the, it's just par for the course. It's just part of the human nature, part of human nature to want to explore depths of experience, that are not necessarily always accessible without taking in some kind of a plant. And they're everywhere, they're I just found out about one, what the heck is it called? Um, Canna, I think, Canna. It comes from South Africa. It's a little bit like MDMA. I'd never heard of it until about a month ago. And then a friend of
okay.
mine has started selling it here in Canada because it's legal. Uh, there's so many plants that can change your mind. DMT, dimethyltryptamine, is the active ingredient in ayahuasca, or the real strong active ingredient in ayahuasca. Ayahuasca, for people who don't know, is made up of two different plants or more, but does require two. And
Mm,
one of them is a vine, a climbing vine called
mm,
Banisteriopsis caapi, and the other one is a DMT-containing plant, usually called chacruna, or sometimes Psychotria viridis. So DMT is the strongest psychedelic on the planet, basically, and it's in all kinds of things. In fact, it's even in the pineal gland of humans. So there's there is some speculation, no proof, but some speculation that when people have what you might call a mystical experience, it's that the DMT in the pineal gland has been released into the brain, because the pineal gland sits between the two lobes. Um,
yes, yes.
and um, uh, and it's not accessible to the blood-brain barrier, I think, or it doesn't cross the barrier. I don't believe. Don't ask me. I'm not an expert on this, but there is speculation that DMT might have something to do with the release of visions, because it certainly does when you ingest it in ayahuasca. um, so now, did you ask another question that I didn't answer properly?
Nope. Don't
Yeah.
worry.
Okay.
So let's get back to our main theme, which is cannabis and spirituality.
Right.
When when was I guess not your first time was that you
Uh-huh.
had cannabis became like a spiritual moment, did it?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So the way that well, not like in a blast yourself off into the cosmos way, like, LSD and some of the others can do.
Of course.
But it can be very, very powerful. It has one of the things I think is wonderful about cannabis, and why have felt like I wanted to educate about it, is it has a unique combination of being both powerful and gentle in the way that it introduces that power, which is different from all the other psychedelics. Um, and except in very high doses, you can also sort of turn away from it and busy yourself doing other things and distract yourself, so you don't really fully experience that depth. Whereas if you take a large enough dose of any of those other psychedelics, you cannot turn away from it. You
Of
can't
course.
decide to go in and cook a meal and read a book and watch TV. It's not going to
Of course.
work. Yeah.
Hmm.
So cannabis has a very special place. Some of the people in my book, which I also agree with, call it the sacrament of peace. So for me, the very first time I took cannabis, I wouldn't call it spiritual, but it was a real eye opener for me, because it showed me that there were different ways to perceive. Um, so cannabis is I call it, so in general, psychedelics are often referred to as non-specific amplifiers. They amplify experience, but in a non-specific way, meaning that you can channel that, in different ways. So I consider cannabis also a non-specific amplifier, because it depends on what you do with it. One way of talking about it in the sort of biochemical way, or what they call the pharmacokinetics of it, is that it opens up the channels in the body. in the mind, in the veins, everything. So it's a vasodilator. It dilates the the veins and everything like that. And so it gives you, it opens up parts of your brain that are often not accessed. So that's where insights come in oftentimes. But also that's the reason, I mean, it's almost universal that people find depths in listening to music that they don't normally experience, right?
Mhm.
So that's an actual physiological, biochemical reaction, right? It's sending blood. One of the people in the Cannabis book, Joan Bellow, says, immediately after having a puff or a toke, whatever you want to call it, what happens is the heart rate speeds up a little bit, and the heart pumps fresh, richly oxygenated blood into all parts of the body. Okay, so including the ears, for example. And it's also why food can taste better, because you've got more blood flow in the tongue, in the taste buds, and so on.
Okay.
So that same function, that amplifying function, if you can kind of get out of your head at least part of the time. It's really difficult for anybody, regardless of whether cannabis is involved, to get completely out of their head, including myself. But even if you can leave some space in the thinking mind, that starts with intention, by the way. You have to, first of all, have the intention to do that. You have to want to do that. Like, you have to sort of sit down on a cushion and meditate with it or whatever, right? And use I'm really big, I, like mentioned before, I lead cannabis ceremonies, and I tell people, we're going to practice meditation here. We're going to practice a very simple follow the breath meditation, and we're also going to do guided meditations and sound journeying and a little bit of movement and all that. But the wellspring, the place you keep coming back to ideally, is this place where you allow thoughts to dissolve. And that's where cannabis does its work most effectively. That's where its true power shows up. It allows the amplifying function allows you to open up physically and mentally at the same time, and relax into the larger space. So I've had many experiences like that. Sometimes I feel, it doesn't happen all the time by any means, but sometimes I feel that I'm in the presence of the holy somehow, that I'm in a giant temple, that it's sacred temple. It just feels like that. I can't describe it any better than that, but it does feel like that. It brings up love a lot more for a lot of people, including myself, when it's a good experience with it. I feel love for my friends and family more strongly than I do other times, oftentimes. So it's kind of a reminder, that it's like, yes, we do have this love going on. You can't, by the way, just rely on that. You can't go, okay, oh, that was a great experience. It opened me up. I had this feelings of connection to the holiness or whatever, and more love. Oh, I'll do that again tomorrow. No, if you do that every day, then the effects begin to diminish fairly rapidly. And it also can become addictive, or you can become very psychologically dependent on it. So it's almost more like, it's similar with the other psychedelics too, actually, is you're not going to get to the enlightened state while you're under the influence. I mean, you can, but it's going to fade a couple hours later, right? So it's like visiting and it's like going to school, oh, yes, reminded. Yes, I reminded that I keep forgetting. I keep coming back to the nose to the grindstone. I keep coming back to my old ways. And then I have the channels opened up again for a short period of time. And I'm reminded that there is this peace underneath all this, and there is this love underneath all this, right? So I've had lots of experiences like that. Sometimes I'm also really big on light, the divine light. I've studied this a little bit. All the mystics talk about light, like as an actual thing, not as a concept, but as an actual experience of the light. It's like the white light. That's in fact the ultimate experience that the Tibetan Buddhists talk about when you die also. If you're completely resolved of everything that was standing in your way, you're able to die into or surrender into the pure white light. So I've had experiences where I really felt the presence of that light as well. So that's about it as far as what I could say about my own kind of spiritual experiences with cannabis. I just find most of the time I really like the deepening, the opening, the heart opening, the gentle quality of it, and the creativity of it, because I get ideas for things. And some people, by the way, they're cynical or skeptical about the ideas that you get with cannabis. They think, oh yeah, well then the next day you realize it's, nothing or something or silly or whatever. But that's not the case for me and a lot of other creative people. You have to, well, famous poet and Buddhist and cannabis lover Allen Ginsberg once said, if he wrote a lot. He was a wonderful poet, famous in his day, and he said, if you write stoned, edit sober. Right? If you write stoned, edit sober. So you get the ideas. They're often very appropriate, but because of the amplifying function of cannabis, they might seem better than they would seem the next day when you're back, on the ground. So that's where the edit sober part comes in. So it's kind of like fishing. You maybe you catch 20 fish that day. And you don't really look at them. You just pull them out and throw them in your basket. And then you get back on shore and you go, oh, that one's too small. Throw it back. This one's perfect. We'll take this one. And I find that, that especially if you have a project of some kind, if something you're working on or a problem even, you can go into it with cannabis. This is a different function, by the way. This is not the same kind of emptying into the holy space of cannabis that I'm talking about and entering the temple of Santa Maria. This is using cannabis as a creative impetus, tool. And so the way it works for me is, if I'm working on something, I'll enter into it the way a writer would enter into the story that he's writing or something, right? I'll enter into it for a few minutes and I'll get insights into it. Sometimes I can actually visualize the situation if it involves something like a room, like when I was organizing this conference. Sometimes I could actually look down in my imagination at the space and I go, okay, so the vendor table should be over here, that kind of thing. So you can go into something for a short period of time, get some insight, and then come back out. The problem for a lot of people is that we don't come back out. We just keep spinning over and over and over in our head. So it's like a little gestalt where you get a nugget of wisdom and then it loses energy at some point. That's the point where you have to recognize that don't hang around there longer, because it's just spinning your brain at that point. Okay. So anyway, that's the other thing that cannabis can do, is it can open up channels of insight that way.
Stephen, it has been a great talk. I know I asked you for a meditation till the last time, but I guess we're right on time. And I'll rather if you come again in the very near future, and then
Sure.
we can talk more about psychedelics and spirituality, cannabis and spirituality. I mean, there's a lot to say. This was just like an introduction, and I'm
Sure.
happy to have you. Your experience with it has been great, and your knowledge is remarkable. We
Yes.
can know that. I guess you have lots of experiences with obviously autochthonous or indigenous persons. Do you?
Yeah. See, yes.
That would be a great aspect
Yeah.
to talk about on another TV
Absolutely.
show
Yeah.
or show. I was very, very interested in what you have to say, and I
Mhm.
guess I have a lot of more questions, but this is going to take a lot of more of your time. So I'll
Mhm.
rather if you tell us about your book, how can we get it, and what whom might it satisfy this book? Who is looking for?
Well, there's that book in particular, yeah. And by the way, the publisher, the same publisher, Park Street Press, under the umbrella of Inner Traditions, has a Spanish edition. Now, it just came out this year. It's called Cannabis, Espiritualidad. So for those people among your audience who are their first language is Spanish, it's also available now in Spanish, translated into Spanish. So it's available, anywhere basically. It's certainly going to be it certainly is on Amazon. That book's been around for a few years, so it's sold almost 30,000 copies now, the English version anyway. So lots of people have seen that book at this point. And if your local bookstore doesn't have it, then they could at least order it because it's easy to find. Yeah. And then the other one is How Psychedelics Can Help Save the World, also the same publisher. Thanks for bringing that picture up right away. And that one also is, the cannabis book I mentioned early in our conversation, I wrote about 20% of the chapters or 20% of the content of the book, and had 17 other contributors. This How Psychedelics Can Help Save the World book, I wrote less, and I have 25 contributors, but they're all amazing people. They're leaders in the field of psychedelics, a lot of them. Some of them are kind of almost famous in that world anyway, like Dennis McKenna and a few others. Yeah, same thing, same publisher, same availability, except there is no Spanish edition of that one. It hasn't sold as many copies, so they haven't felt inspired to do a Spanish language version of that one. Yeah.
Well, it was amazing having you. I hope to see you very, very soon.
Sure.
And joining what we're doing. I am pleased to have you. Thank you very much, and thank you to everyone else who was here. And if you're looking into this video later on, please do share with people that will feel or would be benefited by this kind of information.
Yeah, you asked who would be interested. Well, I would say anyone who's willing to change, willing to look honestly at their life and realize that we know so little about all of what is possible, and that there is underneath everything, all the worries that we have, all the fears and confusion, and even the anger and all those other feelings that we have that limit us or that make us less than at peace. It's possible to release all that stuff, not quickly. There's no magic bullet, as we say in English, but by calming the mind, practicing calming the mind, such as with a meditation, and possibly, if you're interested and willing to, go into the, sort of an exploration, working with cannabis, I would I'm not trying to sell the book, but honestly, I would highly recommend, if you're interested in doing that, to read the book, because it gives a lot of guidance about how you could do that. The other book, the How Psychedelics book, is not so much of what we call a self-help book. It's more inspirational about the different kinds of possibilities and connecting the use of psychedelics to the kind of transformation that's required. For example, what was the name of that organization, Despertar, that came on the video just before we talked?
Yes.
The text of that was amazing. That was exactly the way I see the world, that we are coming together to transform ourselves and the world. And that's what all this is about ultimately, right? The healing of oneself is just the beginning. It's like, sometimes the analogy I like to use is like you're fixing your own car. So your own car is your mind and body. Some people spend their whole life working on the car in the garage and polishing it and, keeping it looking great, but they never go anywhere with it. The purpose of a car is to go somewhere. So fixing the car, getting it roadworthy, is just the first step. And then the next step is getting, participating, bringing your your clarity, your peace, your love, your creativity into the world to share with other people and help change the world. Because right now the world is not exactly going in the right direction. It needs more wisdom. We need more wisdom. We need more peace. We need more love. We need more kindness. We need more clear thinking.
I agree, but still, in order for us to get harmony, we just have to get through chaos.
Sorry. Yes. Anyway, my wife and I are watching the baseball, and there's only one team of all the 30 teams that's in Canada. It's the Toronto Blue Jays. All the other teams are in the United States, and the Blue Jays just won their series, and now they're moving on. So, and it was right down to the last game. It was called a best of 7, and they were tied 3-3, and the seventh game was tonight, and when I left dinner, they were losing 2-1, but my wife just stuck her head in the wall and went in through the door and went, "Jays won."
Perfect.
So I, that may not be what somebody would associate it with being a spiritual person, but it doesn't matter. No me importa.
Don't worry, and congratulations on your team winning the whatever it's called.
Well, now they're going up. Now they have to play a really, really difficult team. They'll probably get slaughtered, but that doesn't matter. Anyway, I'm sorry we didn't leave time. You had asked if we could do a little guided
Don't worry,
meditation.
we'll have more time on the next one.
Okay.
And
yeah.
Obviously, we want to hear more from you, so we always have more to talk about, and then do some meditation as well. Thank you much.
Yeah. El placer es mío. Pleasure is mine. Yeah.
Thank you very much, and thank you, everyone. Have a great night. Bye-bye.